Add the wakened up yeast. And it's sugar, so now it's been eating. It's in a warm environment, it's happy. I'm going to add the cornmeal, the whole wheat, the other ingredients, everything but the bread flour. Blend that up. This is just a mixing and a blending. When we add the bread dough, or the bread flour, we're not going to add all of it because depending on the humidity and everything that's what we want to know, we want the dough to be a ball that goes around and around and it cleans the edges. That's when I know it's the proper amount of flour. And this is true whenever you're using any kind of yeast, making any kind of yeast bread or yeast dough. So I'm just going to add some of it. There's still some left over. Turn it on. The blades of the food processor are going to do the kneading for me, and it'll start developing the gluten so it's nice and chewy the way we like pizza dough. And there's one big dough ball moving around, cleaning the edges. I'm going to go ahead and put on gloves so I can touch it. Whenever we touch dough, we want to make sure our hands are greased and oiled to keep them from sticking to our hands. Plus, we don't want the oils from our hands to get into the dough. And this is a nice soft dough. Looks like this. Might be a little too soft. I might add a tiny bit more flour, maybe a half a teaspoon. Get a little drier so it doesn't stick to my hands. Making bread dough, especially yeast dough, is a lot of intuition. You just have to do it and get used to how it changes in different weather patterns, humidity. So now I have a nice dough. I'm going to go ahead and oil it up a little bit. We're going to put it in a pan so we can, I'm going to need a pan. Does anybody have a clean bowl I can use? So now we're going to let it rise. We're going to put it in a warm place and let it rise until it doubles in size. I'm spraying spray olive oil on it so it doesn't stick. I'm going to add some plastic wrap. And this plastic wrap is going to act like a little house. It'll hold a lot of the heat in from the warm area that we're going to put it in. We're going to put it over on top of the stove that's been on. So it just acts as a little house, and it's going to double in size. If I flatten it right now, it'll allow the yeast to work quicker at doubling because it doesn't have to work as hard, so it doesn't have as much dough left. I'm going to go ahead and put a cloth on it just to make another little house. It helps hold the warmth. This oven is on. I'm not sitting it on top. I just want it in a warm place so the yeast are comfortable and they're doing their thing. They're making CO2. Oil my hands so that the dough doesn't stick. I'm going to take it off my little house that I made for it. It's all nice and soft and easy to touch. Now it's ready to be put on a pizza pan. We have our dough disc is what we call it. When you're pressing out pizza, you go from the inside out using your knuckles. If you puncture a hole, it's okay. We can still pinch it in, making a little edge if you want, or you don't have to if you want to crack a crust. For those of you that like stuffed crust pizza, you can put a little mozzarella cheese or cheese stick and you roll it into the edge of the crust for a stuffed crust cheese pizza. So it's mostly evened out. Now what I'm going to do, we also want to make holes in it so it doesn't puff up. So we just take our hands and make little holes, which is fine. I'm going to take some plastic wrap. We're going to let it sit in the heat a little bit longer so it'll rise and get puffy. It'll have a nicer texture. So this is a second rising for this yeast dough. Sometimes recipes don't say to do that. I think it makes a better quality product. It's a little puffier and it's not as thick and gooey. The plastic wrap just helps it hold the heat so it happens faster. And we'll go take that over there and put it in the warm area. This is the sauce. Very simple, don't have to cook it. Just a bunch of seasonings, a tomato paste, thickens it up, gives it a strong tomato flavor. The sauce gets a little smoother. And then we added onions, garlic, oregano, thyme, things that are very Italian-y. A little sugar helps with the garlic. Garlic can be bitter. So just add a little bit of sugar to it, or you can use another kind of sweetener that you want. And it does that. So after this rises, we'll go ahead and put the sauce on and we'll talk about that next. So the next step, after it's risen a little bit, we're gonna add the sauce. You can add 1/4 of a cup if you like a little sauce. You can add a 1/2 cup if you like a whole sauce. Of course, that's gonna increase your cost. Spread it, some people like it all the way to the edges. Some people like it just in the middle. They like their edges without sauce. And of course, when you're making your own crust, you can decide whether it's going to be a regular, a thin, or a thick. It's just how you want the pizza. But understand that your cooking time is going to change based on how thick your crust is. There you go. You want it a little bit off to the sauce. One way of spreading sauce is by moving the pan. There we go. Then we'll either put pepperoni on it or you can put any other toppings. Today we're going to put pepperoni and cheese. Turkey pepperoni is available. This is a pork-based. Pepperoni is a very flavorful, high fat. It's so high in fat that it's called a fat and not really a meat because it is extremely high in fat. Quite a bit of calories. Your mozzarella cheese is a naturally low fat usually. You can buy a full fat mozzarella cheese. You can use fresh mozzarella. You can do just cheese pizza, which is very popular with your younger elementary school. They actually don't want pepperoni. It has too much flavor. It's just a little too much. And then you top it with cheese. We'll pop it at a very high temperature into the oven. That's the whole point. Your pizza ovens are going to cook at very high temperatures for short amounts of time. You just want the cheese to melt and be bubbly. Your pepperoni's already cooked. It really is just getting to temperature. And you want to get that crust cooked. So we'll put that in the oven and we'll come back with the finished product.
Okay, so this is the homemade crust and sauce. This is the pre-made crust and jar sauce with soy meat substitute. And then there's the store-bought frozen. I thought the store-bought frozen was really sweet, and the crust was it had a weird texture. It was a little harder and chewier when you were chewing. The pre-made crust and jar sauce, the crust was really thin, so that made it really crunchy. And I really liked the meat substitute. It had a lot of flavor in it, and the cheese was also really good. The homemade crust and sauce, this one had good flavor, but the crust was a little underdone. And overall, I think that I enjoyed this one, even though it had a crunchier crust, because of the flavor. This one is the homemade crust and sauce. This one is the pre-made crust and jar sauce. and this is the store-bought frozen. I thought the frozen one, it tasted really good, the flavor was really good, but the crust was thinner, so it was a lot crunchier, and the top didn't brown as much, but it does look nice and colorful. This pre-made crust was a little chewy, but the overall look and the flavor was really good. And then the homemade crust and sauce was definitely my favorite. As far as look goes, I think I overcooked the cheese a little, but it does give it a really good flavor. And the dough and the sauce is definitely the best out of them.
This is the homemade crust and sauce. This one was the best one to me. The dough was the freshest and softest. It was a little bit underdone, but overall flavor was the best for this one, although it didn't have the best appearance. The pre-made crust and jar sauce was probably the second best to me. The flavor was pretty good, but not quite as good as the fresh one. The crust was a little bit dense. And then the store-bought frozen, the flavor was not very good. Texture was it was also kind of dense and hard to bite into. And then the appearance for that one, I guess, was better than the other two, but just not the best.
This is the homemade crust in scratch, store-bought frozen, in pre-made crust and jar sauce. Definitely the most tasty is the homemade crust and sauce. It's softer, everything it feels fresh, it just is easy to eat. This one over here was a little bit tough and the flavor is not very good. Same with this one. This one's even, I think this one's a little better than this one, flavor wise. But definitely it makes a difference whenever you make it from scratch.